I want to talk to you about the Rebbe Rashab. Tell you some stories about the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe Rashab's yarzheit is tonight. The Rebbe Rashab passed away on Beis Nissen, Tov Reish Pei. Beis Nissen in the year 1920. The story of the Rebbe Rashab's histalkus, the story of how the Rebbe Rashab passed away, is a story unto itself. It's a truly amazing story, and I'm going to begin the story a few years before he passed away. The Rebbe Rashab passed away in 1920. In 1910, they were doing remont. They were doing repairs. They were doing expansion in Lubavitch. It was already Tafresh Ayin Aleph. It was the new Hebrew year. It was 5,671, but the English year was still 1910. And they were expanding the Beis Medrash. So when it came Yom Tif, they didn't have the regular accommodations. So they used what they used to call in those days the Kleinim Zal. In Lubavitch there were two shuls, a larger shul and a smaller shul. The larger shul was being repaired, so they used the smaller shul. Unbeknownst to the Hasidim who set up the whole Fabrengen, they put the Rebbe Rashab's chair in the same spot where his father's Tahara, the Rebbe Marash's Tahara, had taken place. The Rebbe Marash had passed away almost 30 years before, and they did his Tahara in the small Zal, and they put the Rebbe Rashab's chair down in the very, very spot where his father's Tahara had taken place. As soon as the Rebbe Rashab walks into Fabrengen, this is Simchas Teire, Tov, Reish, Ayin Aleph, almost 10 years before he passes away. He sees where they put his seat, immediately he becomes very, very emotional. And the Fabrengen was out of this world. There are records from different Chassidim, from Folakan and from Yudel Chitrik and from Perlov, who were there. Rabbi Jacobs writes about it also. It was an unforgettable Fabrengen. The Rebbe Rashab spoke with his whole neshama about his father and how much he loved his father and how much he missed his father. It was unbelievably emotional. And he kept looking at the Elter Chassidim, and he asked them if they remember his father. You remember my father? I know you saw him, but did you know my father? Very, very emotional. He cried a lot. And they were worried about his health. They were very, very worried about his health, because he was getting very, very emotional. The Rebbe Rashab was not the healthiest man, and they were afraid that it would affect his heart adversely. So the previous Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe, said to the Rebbe Rashab, maybe we should stop the Fabrengen. The Rebbe Rashab said, Simchas Teire, stop the Fabrengen. Simchas Teire, the Fabrengen is going on. So when they really, really, really decided that the Fabrengen has to stop, they used the one weapon that they knew would work. The Rebbe's mother. The Rebbe's Rivke was called, summoned. She would pass away 3 years after. She was already probably 80 years old at this point. And they told her that the Rebbe's Fabrengen, and he's reminiscing about the Rebbe Marash. She's getting very, very, very emotional, and it would be a good idea that the Fabrengen should be stopped. So she walked into the Fabrengen. As soon as she walks into the Fabrengen, the Rebbe gets up for his mother. Of course, when the Rebbe gets up, everybody else gets up. And she walks over to him, and the Rebbe Rashab, with the greatest kibbud of aim, is talking to his mother. And she says to him, Efshazol machana hefsek. Maybe we should make an interruption. He says, why? It's Simchas Teire, Fabrengen with Chassidim. So she says to him, Dir is nit gut. If you speak Yiddish, you'll appreciate this more. Dir is nit gut. Dir is gut means you're not well. You're exerting yourself too much. You don't feel well. But dir is nit gut in Yiddish could mean that you're not feeling well, and it could also mean that your life is miserable. You don't have a good lot. You didn't get a good card. So she said to her son, the Rebbe, dir is nit gut means you're not feeling well right now. And he responds immediately, mir is nit gut, mir is gut, mir is gar gut. Halavai soll Yosef Yitzchak sein as gut. I don't have it good, I have it good, I have it very good. Halavai, my son, should have it so good. This is 9.5 years before his histalkus. At the time, it was just a off the cuff remark. It's pretty awesome. If you heard those words, you need to tremble. And we all know the history. Yosef Yitzchak didn't have it so good like the Rebbe Rashab. This happened that Fabrengen. In 14, as you all know, World War I started. World War I started. The Germans had initially great successes, right? They entered Russia, they entered France, and they were very, very successful. I want you to know something. The Rebbe Rashab had a deep, deep, deep hatred for the Germans. A tiefe sinne. The Rebbe Rashab says, it's not possible to hate more than I hate Wilhelm, the German Kaiser, who started World War I. At the Feind gehat sinnes Moves. And when you read about it, it's exactly the same hatred that the Alter Rebbe had for Napoleon exactly 100 years before. 101 years to be exact. Right? The war, Napoleon was Ayin Beis, Ayin Gimel, 1812, and now you're talking 1914. The whole story of the Rebbe Rashab and Kaiser Wilhelm is the same as the Alter Rebbe and Napoleon, with the opposite outcome. Napoleon lost, and the Alter Rebbe remained in Luzhne. The Germans lost World War I, but the world changed. The Rebbe Rashab never went back to Lubavitch. Things changed, as I'll explain to you momentarily. The Rebbe Rashab had this deep-seated hatred for the Germans. He hated them sinus movis. The Friedrich Rebbe once told the following story, that in 1906 or 1907, right, this is 6 or 7 years before World War I, he and the Rebbe Rashab were in Würzburg in Germany. And they heard that the German Kaiser was going to speak. So the Rebbe Rashab said to Friedrich Rebbe, come, let's go. So they went to a location where there was hundreds, thousands of people gathered in a big outdoor amphitheater, and Wilhelm was coming to speak. Now, what are the chances of noticing two Jews in a crowd of thousands? Now, of course, they were dressed Eastern European, and this was Western Europe, but nevertheless, Wilhelm gets up on the stage, he looks around, he spots the Rebbe immediately. He turns to one of his advisors, and he says something, and they both laugh. 5 minutes later, the Rebbe Rashab is approached and asked to leave before the speech. This is a true story. The Friedrich Rebbe tells the story himself. And when the Rebbe Rashab walks away, he turns to the Friedrich Rebbe and he says, hat schon Pläne für a ganze Milchome. He has all the plans for a war, for a complete war. This is 1906. This is 7 or 8 years before World War I. And the Rebbe Rashab hated him. The Rebbe Rashab saw him mamish. He saw Hitler in him. He saw everything evil in this German Kaiser. But there's another story which is even more compelling, or I don't know, more compelling than this story, I don't know, but it's also compelling. There were in one of these places in Germany, I don't know if it was Berlin or Würzburg or someplace else, there was a private park that was exclusive. It was available only to nobility and to royalty, to the upper class. And the Rebbe Rashab was walking with the Friedrich Rebbe, and they come to the gate of this very exclusive park, and the Rebbe Rashab says to Friedrich Rebbe, they're standing by the gate and they're looking inside, Ich wollte sehr gewollt hereingehen. I really would like to enter. So the Friedrich Rebbe, his father wants, so for money you can accomplish anything, any place in the world pretty much. It's only a question of how much. He gives the guard a generous bribe. The guard is of course very pleased. He lets them in and he gives them a tour. In this beautiful park, and there are these villas, these like little homes that are privately owned. And he shows them who each villa belongs to. This belongs to the Secretary of State, and this belongs to the head of the army, and so forth. And this is Wilhelm's private suite. So the Rebbe Rashab says to Friedrich Rebbe, Ich wollte sehr gewollt da reingehen. I really want to go in. So for money, he gives him another bribe, and he opens up the door. He lets him into Wilhelm's little villa. The Rebbe Rashab walks in, and he sits down on Wilhelm's chair. And he says, a Klugenstuhl. It's a smart throne. Rebbe Rashab felt the Germans are not, unfortunately the Germans are not stupid. It's a good question, what's worse, cruel or stupid? And sometimes stupid is worse than cruel, but Germans they used all their chokhmah for lahora. And the Rebbe Rashab took a piece of Wilhelm's stationery, and he wrote a Maimer Chassidus sitting in Wilhelm's chair, using his stationery, and he took it with him. And upon him, this was a bira, this was a way of, so to speak, conquering. He sat in his chair and wrote Chassidus with his pen on his stationery, and he took it with him. In any case, so the Rebbe Rashab saw the evil of this German Kaiser Years before World War I, the Rebbe Rashab said once in Friedrich Rebbe, he says, the Franzosen seien Balei the Deutschen seien upper course. He said, the French are pleasure seekers, the Germans are upper course. I don't have to translate applicators, right? He hated them. When World War I started, it was the summertime, and the Rebbe Rashab says, I am not going to be under German occupation for 1 second. Just like the Alter Rebbe. Right? Many people remained under the occupation. The Alter Rebbe ran away from Napoleon. He didn't want to be under Napoleonic rule for a minute. The Rebbe Rashab packed his bags and he left. He left Lubavitch. The yeshiva remained, the Sfarim remained, they continued learning. In other words, World War I was not World War II. The Germans were not treating Jewish people in World War I as they did in World War II. But the Rebbe Rashab said, I hate him. He is klipa, he's the embodiment of everything evil. I don't want to be under his jurisdiction for 1 minute. And he left. The plan was that he would return to Lubavitch when the war ended. But when he got into the wagon and they rode out of Lubavitch, he said, for 101 years Lubavitch was the capital of Chassidus, and now Lubavitch is going into Golos. He knew that it was a one-way trip. He knew. As the war wore on and ended, Lubavitch collapsed. In 1918, the last Bochum left Lubavitch. All the Rebbe Rashab's Sfarim were shipped to Moscow, which at that time was on the other side of a border. And those are the Sfarim that were still trying to retrieve. The Rebbe Rashab never got his Sfarim back. And the Rebbe Rashab moved to the city of Rostov. Rostov, if you look at a map, is very far south of Russia. It's very far south. And he opened up shop in an apartment building. Okay, the Rebbe Rashab got himself a very, very comfortable, large apartment. But it was not Lubavitch. Lubavitch was a little village where you didn't have a house. You had an estate, you had a few acres. Now he's living in an apartment building. You understand? If you had one apartment, he had a different apartment. Upstairs, downstairs, they had neighbors. Neighbors. Like you have neighbors, and I have neighbors. The Rebbe Rashab had neighbors. And they had fabrengens, and neighbors used to complain and call the police. And the Rebbe Rashab knew that he's not returning. He knew that he's not going back to Lubavitch. In fact, in 1918, word came to the Rebbe that there was a fire, and his house and the Bismedish, everything burned to the ground. So his Rebbetzin said to someone who was close to the family that we just got word that there was a fire, and everything that we owned burned to the ground. Mezainen von dem zufrieden. We're happy about it. The Rebbe Rashab didn't want other people living in his dire, the Rebbe Marash dire, burnt it, nothing left. There's nothing left of the Rebbeim's homes in Lubavitch, just the ground. And the Rebbe Rashab did a lot of very interesting things. He built a mikveh, he designed a mikveh. You see, in the shtetl, in the village, you didn't have to design a mikveh because every village was built on a river. And the river is a mikveh. Sometimes you can tell you about the river itself, sometimes you have to build a little pit near the mikveh, sometimes you have to heat it up, but believe me, it wasn't so hygienic. But nevertheless, in a city, you don't have access to a river. So the Rebbe Rashab designed a mikveh from rainwater. All our mikvahs today are rainwater mikvahs, as opposed to from mayones, fountains, rivers. They're much more complicated. Halachas are much more complicated. And the Rebbe Rashab designed the mikveh. He put himself into it. He studied materials, different types of cement and different types of rubber. What is kosher? What is not kosher? The Rebbe Rashab immersed himself in all kinds of physical things to design a kosher mikveh. And this is the mikvahs that we, the Lubavitchers today, make. It's based on this mikveh of the Rebbe Rashab. And what's amazing is that in the last 10 years, they purchased that house that the Rebbe Rashab lived in the 1910s. And in the basement, where the mikveh was, there was cement. They uncovered the cement. And not only was the mikveh there, the water was still in the mikveh. Not the boil where you toivel, but the water from the rainwater mikveh, it was put there before communism, and it was still there after the death of communism. It's a modern inyan. The water survived 80 years. The water from the boy, which the
past 10 years.
Yes. They bought the house, and I'll tell you some more details. The water is still in the pit. It's an amazing, an absolutely remarkable.
Is it not natural?
What natural?
Is it not natural that the water should still be there?
Well, the fact that anything of the mikveh was left 80 years ago. It's a long time, 80 years. Yeah, you're right. If you leave water in a hole and you just cover it, it's going to stay there. But the fact that they left it there, the phenomena is, the fact of the matter is, that mikvah was built before Soviet Union, and it was there after the death of Soviet Union. That's how I personally, I think it's a remarkable thing. And he lived in this house in Rostov. In the meantime, the world was brewing the revolution. The revolution started in Leningrad, which is in the north. It's the top of Russia. The Rebbe is living at the bottom of Russia. And the revolution is advancing. And of course, you all know the story, the Hurrah story. You know the Hurrah story, right? The Hurrah story is based on the Rebbe Rashab telling people to vote. The Rebbe Rashab hated the communists, almost as much as he hated the Germans. And there was a small window of democracy, and the Rebbe Rashab said everybody has to go vote, because it was an opportunity to establish a government which would give people real rights and freedom of religion. But of course it failed. And in the winter of 1920, the Bolsheviks came to Rostov. They entered the city, they killed a lot of people, they displaced everybody who was wealthy, the bourgeois, as they called them, the upper class. They took away their wealth, and took away their homes, took away their businesses. And they did what they did, with all the brutality and cruelty. And it was a very difficult time. And there was martial law. In other words, the streets were run by the military, not by a civilian militia, but by the police, by the army. If you didn't follow the rules, they shot you. Not complicated. Rule number 1, there's a curfew. You can't be out after a certain hour of the night. Rule number 2, you're not allowed to gather in large groups of people. Rule number 3, you're not allowed to sell and drink alcohol. Rule number 4, you're not allowed to collect money. Okay? Comes Purim. Farbrengen is at night, after the curfew. People are gathering. They're going to drink mashke, and they're going to collect money. Alle vier Avedas, so they are reingepackt in einem. So Farbrengen begins very, very subdued, very, very, very low-key, very depressed. And it goes on for a few hours. The Rashab says, there's siches. They're humming, they're whispering, they don't want to bother the neighbors. You understand, the neighbors shouldn't call the police.
What year is this?
This is 1920, the beginning of 1920. March 1920. This is Purim. Suddenly, around midnight, the Rebbe Rashab turns to Friedrich Rebbe. And he says to the Friedrich Rebbe, Simchas Teire have mir sich auf dem nicht gericht. Simchas Teire we didn't see this. Ich will as jetzt so sein wie Simchas Teire. I want that now we should have Simchas Teire. Now, a Rebbe, Rosh Hashanah, and Simchas Teire sees the whole year. The fact that the Rebbe Rashab says that he didn't see is very significant. He says to Friedrich, we didn't see this, so it didn't happen. It doesn't exist. In this house, this is not happening. He says, we're going to be Simchas Teire. And the Friedrich Rebbe says, Tate, Pekuach Nefesh. You can't even say what they could do. And the Rebbe Rashab said, now is Simchas Teire. And he told the Chassidim to sing loud, to go out and call more people, to drink mashke, and to collect money. The Rebbe Rashab Purim had what was called Kupas Rabbeinu. Kupas Rabbeinu was stuck and the people gave al daite. The money was given to the Rebbe Rashab. He was free to do with the money as he wished. You trusted him that he did good things with it, which was a pretty good investment. And they made noise. The neighbors woke up, called the cops, and they came in. Now, if you watch the Living Torah, in one of the Living Torahs of one of these weeks, they show a clip that this guy Haber says that his father was a kid at this Farbrengen, and when the Friedrich Rebbe was nervous about they're going to come in, so the Rebbe Rashab said, "Mir werden sie sehen und sie werden uns nicht sehen." We'll see them and they won't see us. This is what he writes, but in other sources it says different things. What happened was, they walked into the Farbrengen, 2 KGB people. It wasn't called the KGB at that point. It was called the NKVD, the Chekoyet. They kept changing names. What happened was, they were very brutal, and they would do terrible things. So when it would leak out of Russia, when the Western papers would say that the secret police of Russia is doing terrible things, so Russia would make a big announcement, and they're doing reformation, they would change the name and continue doing the same practices. And then when they got word, they would change the name again. The names kept on changing. It was exactly the same thing. They walked in and they stood opposite the Rebbe. And the Rebbe Rashab started to curse them. He said, I hate them. I hate them. In Yiddish. And they were all Jews who spoke Yiddish. They were yeshiva bachram. They knew exactly what he's saying. They're standing and looking at him. And he's cursing them. I'll turn it over. He's letting them know that in his world they're the personification of evil. He says, in my world they don't exist. They're not a Matthias. They're headed. They're just pure evil. And he's carrying on, and Rebbe Rashab is mevatel them. And Berel Rivkin, who wrote an account of the Fabrengen, says their faces are turning red and white and pink and green. He's mopping the floor with them. And everybody in the room is listening to this. First of all, it was obviously, nobody could have anticipated then how bad they were going to be. And the Rebbe Rashab right away appreciated this is terrible. These are bad, this is a bad idea. And it's a Yeshult, and he cursed them in every imaginable way. People, of course, were very afraid for the Rebbe. And every time the Frierdiker Rebbe would say to his father that maybe he should, so to speak, relax, there was nothing to talk about. Now it's Simchas Torah, I'm afraid of nothing and anybody. And as he's talking about them, he finally says, they don't exist. They're not real. They're a figment of people's imagination. There's no truth to them whatsoever. And then he says finally, Ich will sagen in Chassidus, wenn sie in ganzen battle werden. I'll speak Chassidus and they'll completely disappear. And he says the Maimer Reishis Goyim Amalek, the most famous Maimer of the Rebbe Rashab, which talks about the erasure of Amalek and how Amalek is a non-Metzias. The whole thing is a lie. Anyway, they leave. And nothing happens. That's a mess. You would expect that the next morning they would come and arrest the Rebbe for counter-revolutionary activities, for revolution against revolution. Nothing happened. This was Purim. And it was an unbelievable event. The Rebbe Rashab just, he's a tzaddik gomer, a perfect tzaddik, who's sensitive to Kedusha and Klippa like nobody else. And he sensed right away, this is Ra Sheberatz, pure evil. This was Thursday night. Sunday morning, the Rebbe Rashab calls. Oh wait, I forgot to tell you a very important thing. He said a lot of different things, but one of the things that he said, and I think he said it more than once, was, Ich ken mit zei nit zayin in einem. I cannot live with them. I cannot cohabit. I can't be with these people. Sunday morning, he called him one of his gaboyim, and he sent him to another city to bring him Sfarim. The Rebbe Rashab had a huge library, but as I explained to you earlier, his library was in Moscow, and he was in Ostov. He had no access to his library. And he locked himself in his room for a week. We now know that he wrote his will. He was a perfectly healthy man. 59 years old, he wrote his will. It took him a week to write a will. The Rebbe Rashab's will has never been published. It's very, very long and very scholarly. It's a very lamdisha will. One page of the will is published, which are the few details about the previous Rebbe's inyanim, about saying Chassidus and strengthening Tam Chetmimim and so forth. A week he's writing his will, a whole week. He finishes on Friday. Friday night he gets sick. 2 o'clock in the morning, Berel Rivkin says, I get up and I see Chana, one of the Frierdiker Rebbe's daughters, walking with a glass of tea. As I ask her, where are you going? He says, there's Zayde Filtnishkat.
Who's writing this?
Berel Rivkin.
Oh.
He wrote a book called Ashkafta de Rebbe, where he goes through this whole story, blow by blow, in much more detail than I'm giving you. It's a whole book. The Rebbe's in Nechamadina, the Frierdiker Rebbe's wife, had typhus. She was very sick. And he went to see her, went to Menachem, sorry. And when the Rebbe got sick, people were immediately afraid that he Chas Hashem caught it. Typhus was very contagious. And the Rebbe Rashab, throughout his illness, kept on asking, do I have typhus? He knew he was going. He planned it. The Rebbe Rashab wrote his own ticket. But he didn't want to pass away from typhus. So Friday night he didn't feel well. Right? So Shabbos, they made up a small minyan and so on. In 1 week, he passed away. A perfectly healthy man. Purim happened. He cursed them up and down. At the in his world they don't exist. He wrote a will. He got sick and passed away. The whole thing is 16 days from Purim till business. He didn't pass away from typhus. No. You read the story and you see Mamish, a Yid who decides if he's going to live or not live. He says, "I'm checking out of here. I'm leaving it for the Frierdiker Rebbe. I want no part of this." And you think that 9.5 years earlier, he said, my life isn't good? Well, that's wonderful. Halavai, my son should have it so good. The Rebbe Rashab says, with the Bolsheviks, he's not dealing. He left it from feeding him. And like everything else, there's a precedent for it in history. The Mittler Rebbe was told min hashamayim about the Kantonisten. You know what the Kantonisten? This gezerah of taking away little children for 25 years of slave labor in the Russian army. In the middle, the Rebbe says, Ich ken das nicht. I can't deal with it. As soon as the gezerah happened, he got sick, he passed away, and he left it for his son-in-law, the Tzemach Tzedek. I mean, in other words, the idea that Tzaddik says, your job, I did what I got to do now. This is exactly what happened. The Rebbe Rashab saw the Bolsheviks. So first of all, he crushed them with his words. He cursed them and destroyed them. You're talking about a tzaddik. And then he said, okay, Rebbe, my entire Yingele, it's yours. He told the Friedrich Rebbe, he says, this is going to be a very difficult time, and you have to be ready to give your life away. The Rebbe Rashab told his own son, you have to be ready to be amazed in Nefesh HaKiddush Hashem to fight with the Bolsheviks. So he wrote his will. Friday he finished, Friday night he got sick. Battle Rifkin describes what happened each day of the week. He kept getting sicker and sicker. They brought a doctor, and the Friedrich Rebbe goes into the Rebbe, and he says to the Rebbe Rashab, would he mind being examined by a doctor? And he says, if you want, let him examine me. Like, in other words, you're wasting your time. Doctors, do me a favor. I'm the doctor. I'm in charge. You want to bring a doctor? Bring a doctor. So they brought in the doctor. The doctor examined the Rebbe. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. But he had this very, very high fever and was getting sicker and sicker. The Friedrich Rebbe later said that he realized that whole winter, from the beginning of the year, his father was saying goodbye to him. And that there were hundreds of things that happened where the Rebbe was preparing him. He says, but it never dawned on me that such a thing could happen. It was beyond the realm of the possibility that Rebbe Rashab should pass away, should be nostalgic. In any case, Motzei Shabbos Vayikra, 16 days after the Farbrengen of Purim, the Rebbe Rashab was now mamish goises. He was very, very, very ill. Berl Rifkin describes how the Friedrich Rebbe walked out.
Why was he there? Like, did he live in the house?
He was living in the house. He was a bocher. He was the Rav in the house. He was a ben bayis. He was mamish like family. The Friedrich Rebbe walks out of his father's bedroom, and his father is, and he grabs him, and he's crying. Tears, mit hab my head von Stein. He says, our hearts are stone. How could we watch this and not just absolutely? He's watching his father pass away. A Rebbe and a Rebbe. Nu stell sich vor. During the course of the night, they saw the Rebbe saying Shema and Vidui. He was very, very weak. And at a certain point, his eyes were closed. The Rebbe Rashab opens up his eyes and he says, Ich gehe in Himmel und die Ksavim los sich mit euch. Nehmt mir den Saal, weil mir seine nehmen. That means, I'm going into the Himmel. I'm leaving you the Chassidus. Take me into the Saal and we'll be all together. They carried the Rebbe Rashab's bed out of his bedroom into the Bismedish, into the shul. And
was
all...
this in the same building?
Yeah. All Anash and Tmimim were pushed together with the Rebbe B'Shas histalkus. They were in the same room. Which tells you the hiskashrus, the connection that the Rebbe felt to Chassidim and to Tmimim. They were like his family pushed. And the hergish that Chassidim felt towards the Rebbe wanted to be with everybody. They carried his bed into the Zal, and he laid there. And at a certain point, the Friedrich Rebbe became so hysterical, he started to scream, Tate! The Rebbe opened up his eyes, he looked at the Friedrich Rebbe, and he said, I mean, the tone I don't know, the words are written down, but the trop, the music of these words, histalkus, moichin. In other words, so much emotion, so much passion. Moichin. Mind over matter. And he smiled. Those were his last words. And the Friedrich Rebbe would say later that his father lifted him up to a whole new madrege with that comment. And about 2:45 in the morning, the Rebbe Rashab was in Stalak. And Lubavitch was crushed. There was a revolution. I'm sorry, there was a war. And there was a revolution. And then the Rebbe's gone. It was devastating. Meir Itkin tells a story about how his father was Rav Yeneveld. You know Meir Itkin from Eastern Parkway, yes? His father passed away when he was a little boy. And he came to his mother, to his Rebbe, and his wife, and said to her that the Rebbe is gekommen. The Rebbe is gekommen. when the Rebbe Rashab passed away, he comes to his wife and says, the Rebbe came. So she wakes up in the morning and she tells her father, this is Meir Itkin Zayde, who was raising him, that my husband came to me and told me the Rebbe's gekommen. And everyone's very happy. A few weeks later, they got word of the histalkus, and as verstanden, the Rebbe's gekommen. He came, told his wife, the Rebbe came to us. He's on our side now. Could you imagine?
What, this was a dream?
Yeah, it was a dream.
Oh.
He had passed away already. He passed away as a young man. So he comes to his wife and says, his wife, the Rebbe's gekommen. And we're all very happy. So she repeats it to her father. Verstehst? So he says, ich weiß. And it turned out that Rebbe's gekommen. So you understand yourself that the Avelis was unbelievable. Unbelievable. And what's weird about it is that during this whole week that he's sick, he's planning Pesach like as if garnished. The Rebbe Rashab knows that this is it. He made the decision. He's not living with the Russians. And he calls in Yankel Landau to go and prepare matzahs and to get the shmure. You got to do what you got to do. You know, if I'm not going to bake the matzahs tomorrow, but now I got to prepare the flour because that's what you have to do. And he goes through he's living like as if he's going to live forever, knowing full well that this is it. In any case, so they had Avelis at Shiva. Shabbos, Avelis was over already. Shabbos Pashas Tzav. The Friedrich Rebbe calls in Berl Rivkin, the same Berl Rivkin. And he says to him, the Tat hat mir geschrieben, als ich darf sagen Chassidus. My father wrote me that I should say Chassidus for Chassidim. He says, but I can't. Who am I? But to ignore my father's words, I cannot. So I'll say Chassidus to you, and this will be considered like I'm saying Chassidus to everybody. So they were in the cabinet. They were in the Friedrich Rebbe's office. And it was late Shabbos afternoon. It was dark. There were no lights. And the Friedrich Rebbe and this young Bacher, Berl Rivkin, walked back and forth in the room. And the Friedrich Rebbe said his father's Maimer Reishes Gaimamalik, word for word, just like it's printed. And every once in a while he would stop and give commentary, explain it. And then he would again quote from the Maimer, word for word the Maimer. Berl Rivkin was very excited about this, because saying Chassidus is a simon of becoming a Rebbe. So he made sure that the door was open, that people should be able to pass by and poke in their heads. So one of the elder Chassidim, Reb Shmuel Gorari, was from the Choshev Chassidim of the Rebbe Rashab and from the Rebbe Rashab, pokes in his nose. He sees what's going on, and Berl Rivkin sort of like motions, like, come on in. So he came and he stood by the door, and the Friedrich Rebbe saw him and didn't ask him to leave. And this was a very, very positive sign that there's going to be a hemshech, that the Friedrich Rebbe is going to be the Mamal Makam, the successor. 1 week after, this was what it was. Friedrich Rebbe became a Rebbe. And this was the Nachom of Chassidim. And the Friedrich Rebbe started to write letters. And in all of the letters, he refers to himself as Ben Meirchem Verabchem, the son of the Rebbe. And the younger Chassidim, they immediately connect themselves to Friedrich Rebbe. The older Chassidim had a much harder time. In fact, there were certain Chassidim that Friedrich Rebbe says, I'm asking you, please help me. Not as a Rebbe, but as the son of your Rebbe. Please, as the son of your Rebbe, please help me. And then the Friedrich Rebbe got sick. Almost a few months after he became dead, Friedrich Rebbe got sick. And he was very, very ill. He was very close to Hepech HaChaim, and he had typhus. And there was also, one calamity, one tragedy, one patch, one clap after another. And during the period of this illness, the famous story with the Rogatchover occurred, which I suppose you probably know. The Rogatchover was a great god. And although the Rogatchover was really not a chassid, the Rogatchover was his own man. The Rogatchover did what he wanted. But if he had a loyalty, it was Chabad. He used to go to the Kopos Rebbe, which was a different branch of Chabad, which had since folded, and he was very close to Friedrich Rebbe. He was older than the Rebbe Rashab. He was older than the Friedrich Rebbe's father. Nevertheless, even for the Friedrich Rebbe, he had great respect. He used to call him the Nossi. And the Rogatchover was a man who had no respect to anybody. In fact, Mavatal Zayin Alaman. I mean, he once took a sefer from one of the greatest Achrayim, from the greatest Lamdim in the last 300 years. He put it in a cradle, and he shook it and said, Reinish. That's crazy. Mavatal Zayin Alaman. But from Friedrich Rebbe and Gavalke Derachet, Friedrich Rebbe was 22 years younger than him. And the Rebbe Rashab wrote a letter, and he says in this letter that I'm paskening with my Keach HaTeira, that the Friedrich Rebbe has to have a Refuah Shlema. And he did. And then from that point forward, the Friedrich Rebbe used to refer to the Rogatchover as Sar HaTeira, the owner, the possessor of the Teira. And there's another story, I'll share another story, which is brought down in the name of someone by the last name Chanin. That in 1921, the Rogachover came to Rostov, and he went into the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rogachover was a legend in his lifetime. In the Welt of the Rogachover, he walked into the Chotzer, the courtyard in front of the Frierdiker Rebbe's apartment, and all the Bachim came over to him, and gave him Sholom, and they asked him, was ist der Goren gekommen? Why did the Goren come? Ich bin gekommen geben Smicha dem Rebbe. I came to give the Rebbe Smicha. Now, if somebody else would say it, you'd slap him in the face. But the Rogachover could say it. So they went and they told the Rebbe that the Rogachover is here. So the Frierdiker Rebbe came running out of his room, his Makabel Ponov. They went into a room, they spent 4 hours alone. Nobody knows what they discussed. But when he walked out, he said, Yidden darfen haben a Nossi. Jews need a Nossi. The word Nossi, Nossi, Nasi Derenu, the one who phrased a Rebbe as a Nossi, where does the term Nossi come from? The Rebbe used to use it all the time. The first one to use the word Nossi about the Rebbeim was the Rogachover. And he didn't mean it like we do, as Hasidish. He meant it Pashal Halacha. He was a Goan, a Lamden, and in his mind, a Rebbe is a Nossi. It's not just a Rav or a Rosh Hashiva, he's a Nossi. Yidden darf haben a Nossi. The Jews need to be a Nossi. Right? Ubefrat as is Roy, especially that he's worthy. Chosnei koydem l'kol, the son-in-law precedes everybody else. B'nai koydem l'kol, a son comes before everybody else. And the Rogachover paskin, and the Frierdiker Rebbe is the Nossi. But it was curious. That's what he said. Chosnei koydem, this were his words. Chosnei koydem, a son-in-law precedes everybody else, a son precedes everybody else. And remained a great mystery. Until the Rebbe. And the Frierdiker Rebbe was nostalgic. And the Rebbe, by the way, was not married to the Rebbe at the time. And the Rebbe was Chosnei. People wrote that maybe the Rogachover, whether he meant it or he had Ruach HaKodesh, words came from the Eibishter, the Chosnei Koydem Kol Adam was an allusion to Frierdiker Rebbe Zaydim. This is the Rebbe. This is the Malmach. And the Frierdiker Rebbe became the Rebbe, and the rest is history. Frierdiker Rebbe started to build Lubavitch, and the Bolsheviks started to destroy Yiddishkeit. And the Frierdiker Rebbe realized that if he's not going to do, nothing's going to happen. And what his father said, Halavai Zol Yosef Yitzchak Zayin Gut, was fulfilled and materialized unbelievably. I just want to tell you another little detail. During the period of the Frierdiker Rebbe's illness, he had very, very high fever. And he was delirious. What delirious means? He was speaking, mumbling incoherently. So they ran and they called Yankel Landau. Harav Yankel Landau, the Rav of Bnei Brak. Yankel Landau was a great Goan. And he also, like Berel Rifkin, like Rav Berel Rifkin, were very close. They were mamish bnei bayis. They lived in the house. And Yankel Landau was called to look at the Frierdiker Rebbe, to see how ill he was. And they heard him mumbling and muttering words that seemed incoherent. So he said, Das Retter von Hitz. He's speaking from the fever. He's so much fever that he's not being rational. When the Frierdiker Rebbe became better, he called him in, and he said, Hayetochen, als dem Taten sa Chosid, ken zei reden als dem Taten sa Kind. He asked him, how could it be that a Chosid of my father should be able to speak this way about my father's son? In other words, he didn't tell him. In other words, the Frierdiker Rebbe heard him. In his delirium, in his hits, he heard what he said. How could you suspect me, not because of who I am, but because of who my father is, that I should be subject to this kind of delirium? And while I'm telling you stories, I'll tell you another story. Yankel Landau was very kushitz from Rebbe Nishma, very attached to Rebbe Rashab. He actually tried. He wrote a letter to the Rebbe Rashab, and he went to the Oyel in a star. He was 22, 23 years old. He says to the Rebbe, I am asking a bracha that I should die, and that I should be buried within 50 amas of the Rebbe Rashab. A few days later, the Frierdiker is by the Oyel, and the Frierdiker calls him and says, Yankel, der Tat hat gesagt, aufhören schreiben Narrigkeiten. My father started writing Narrigkeiten. Okay, nu, wie man sagt in der Welt, zu Chusam Yagnim Aleinu. Okay, nu,